I hadn't seen my family in a long time. They thought I was broke, a failure barely scraping by. At my father's birthday dinner, my brother smirked and said, "Hope you can afford your own meal tonight." But then the waitress turned to me, smiled, and said, "Welcome back, Owner Grant." And in that moment, everything flipped. If your family has ever made you feel small, stay right here. This story is for you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated? The minute I stepped into Maison Louvelle, the soft clink of crystal and the low hum of moneyed laughter wrapped around me like an old coat I never quite fit into. The chandeliers sparkled above a room full of silk and status, every detail polished to gleaming perfection. I recognized the hostess immediately. She glanced at me, then quickly masked the flicker of recognition with a professional smile. My heels clicked too softly against the marble floor. No designer bag in hand, no diamonds on my wrist, just a navy sheath dress I'd worn twice this year already, and a quiet confidence I didn't need to dress up. At the center of the dining room, the Grant family was already holding court. My father, Harold Grant, was inspecting a bottle of wine like it might try to scam him. My mother, Pristine, in a pearl-colored suit, was whispering something to the waiter, probably asking to replace the candle with one less scented. Lucas, of course, noticed me last. He raised an eyebrow and gave a grin that didn't touch his eyes. "You made it," he said, barely bothering to rise from his chair. "Thought maybe your shift at the cafe ran late." I smiled and took the empty seat across from him. "Good to see you too, Lucas. Hope you can afford your own meal tonight." He chuckled and glanced at Dad like they were sharing some private joke. Dad didn't look up from the wine list. "She always insists on paying her own way," he muttered. "Pride can be expensive." Mom cleared her throat sharply. "Let's just enjoy the evening. 70 doesn't come twice." 70. 70 years of empire-building tax sheltering and Christmas cards that never featured me. I folded my napkin across my lap and looked around. The restaurant hadn't changed much in the last 5 years. Still impossibly elegant. Still a favorite among his club of men who thought compassion was a weakness and wealth was proof of virtue. The waitress approached our table with a bottle of sparkling water in one hand and a folded menu in the other. She was young, maybe 24, hair pulled back in a precise bun. She set the bottle down gently, but her eyes met mine like she'd been waiting all evening. "Welcome back, Owner Grant," she said. The words dropped like ice into the center of the table. Lucas's fork froze halfway to his mouth. My mother's fingers tightened around her wine glass. My father finally looked up, his eyes narrowing like he'd misheard. And for once, no one spoke. I reached for my water, took a sip, and placed the glass down carefully. The silence hung longer than it should have. The waitress didn't flinch. She just turned to my father and asked if he'd like to see the reserve list. I felt it then, that tiny quiet moment of power. Not loud, not cruel, just still, and mine. Lucas recovered first, sort of. "Owner?" He laughed, but it cracked halfway through. "You mean like she works here?" The waitress paused politely. "No, sir. Miss Grant is one of the principal owners of the Maison Louvelle group. She was here last week with our executive chef. Would you prefer the reserve list?" I didn't answer for him. I just picked up my own menu, though I already knew what was on every page. My father's lips were thin. My mother looked at me like she'd never seen me before. "Lucas." He checked his phone under the table, pretending to scroll through something urgent, like maybe he could find a version of reality where this wasn't happening. I didn't need revenge speeches or dramatic reveals. I just sat there in my thrift store dress in a restaurant I quietly owned across from the family that had never once asked how I'd been. Dinner was just getting started. After a few beats, Dad cleared his throat. "Let's not make this a spectacle," he muttered. "It's my birthday." "It is," I replied, not bothering to smile. "And I'm glad to be here." Lucas leaned in, squinting slightly. "So you own this place now? Since when does pouring coffee turn into fine dining empires?" I folded my hands calmly on the white linen tablecloth. "It's a long story. Maybe let's order first." The waitress, sensing the tension but trained for elegance, handed out menus as if she were passing peace treaties. Mom accepted hers like it might bite. Lucas waved his off. "I'll take the filet rare. And if there's anything better than that bottle you brought last year, Dad, I hope Olivia's restaurant has it." I didn't respond. The waitress turned to me next. "Would you prefer your usual Miss Grant the chef has the reserve Bordeaux ready if you'd like to pair it?" Lucas let out a breath through his nose loud enough to be theatrical. Dad looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. "Yes, please," I said softly. "Let's do the pairing. And the tasting menu. It's a special occasion, after all." Her eyes lit up a little. "Of course. Chef Theo will be happy to know you're here tonight." She walked off and we were left with nothing but the sound of silverware and discomfort. My mother finally leaned in, voice low. Is this true? You really own this?" I nodded. "Among other things." Lucas's laugh this time had no amusement in it. Okay. So what, you're rich now, and you never thought to mention it?" I tilted my head. "You never asked. It wasn't just the money. It never was. It was the way they had all decided years ago that I was the failure, the wanderer, the one who didn't belong. I didn't dress the part. I didn't play the game. So I was invisible. Until I wasn't. I looked down at my glass, the reflection of the chandelier dancing across the surface. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, settled. I was here on my own terms, in my own place, with people who had never seen me clearly until they heard someone else say my name with respect. The wine arrived, deep and dark, poured with reverence. I lifted the glass, not to toast, but simply to taste. It was excellent, and so was the silence. The conversation moved on technically, but I could feel it in the air like static before a storm. Lucas tried to launch into a story about a recent client dinner, throwing in names I was sure were meant to impress. My mother smiled politely and nodded at the appropriate moments, but her eyes kept drifting back to me as if waiting for something to crack open and explain what just happened. I didn't offer anything. I sipped the wine, let its layers settle on my tongue, and let the silence do the talking. The waitress returned to clear the bread plates. As she leaned over, she lowered her voice just enough so only I could hear, "The chef will have your appetizer out shortly, Ms. Grant. He's excited you're here tonight." I gave a small nod. She straightened and moved on, but not before Lucas caught the exchange. "You know the chef I met?" His eyes across the table. "We've worked together a few times." "Worked together," he repeated slowly, like the words were in a different language. At that moment, the manager passed by, pausing briefly at our table. He addressed me first. "Ms. Grant, would you prefer the LaRue 2015 as your next bottle, or would you like to try the new Sonoma Pinot we just added to the list?" Lucas blinked. My mother's eyes darted between me and the manager. "The LaRue is fine." "Thank you," I replied evenly. "Very good." He gave a slight bow and moved on. There was a beat of silence. "What was that?" Lucas muttered. Finally, "Wine service." I said, "No, I mean, why is he asking you that, like you're calling the shots?" "Because I am." I didn't need to say it out loud. It was etched into the way staff looked at me, spoke to me, moved around me. Subtle things, like how the sommelier hadn't even glanced at my father when offering the bottle, or how the waiters never asked Lucas if he wanted his steak cooked a certain way. The second course arrived delicate and fragrant, and with it came a low conversation from the servers near the corner station. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the room's acoustics made it easy. "She's the one from the executive board, right?" "Yeah, Ms. Grant. She was here with Theo last week, going over expansion menus." "You sure that's her positive?" "I trained under her when she took over the flagship location in D.C. I smiled behind my napkin. They weren't being careless. They just didn't expect I'd be seated with people who didn't already know. Lucas stabbed his fork into his duck confit like it had insulted him. Mom dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, then said, "Olivia, maybe you should talk to Lucas about opportunities. He has connections. You could find something steady." Finally, I swallowed carefully before setting down my fork. "Steady," I repeated. Yes, something reliable. You're not getting any younger, dear, and Lucas could help you. Right, Lucas? Lucas shrugged, chewing like he was bored. Sure. I mean, we always have positions open for junior associates. I could talk to HR. If you're serious this time. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't serious at all, just offering a bone to make himself look good. Mom was nodding like it was the most generous thing anyone had ever done. I just smiled gently. That won't be necessary, but thank you. It didn't matter how politely I said it. Lucas still took it as an insult. You know, Liv, it wouldn't hurt you to be realistic. This is a nice restaurant and all, but you can't keep floating around pretending I'm what? He waved his hand vaguely as if the sentence finished itself. You don't need to impress anyone here. I'm not trying to impress you, Lucas. I know, he snapped, which meant he absolutely felt threatened and had no idea how to deal with it. Dad finally spoke without looking up. You've always been dramatic, Olivia. You could have joined the firm. You chose this instead. I didn't argue. Not with people who had already written their version of my story in ink. The third course arrived a seafood risotto laced with saffron and white truffle. The chef's signature. I recognized it immediately. Our server placed it in front of me with a small flourish. Chef Theo sends his regards. He'll stop by if you'd like to say hello. Thank you, I said. Lucas was visibly annoyed now, so you know the chef too. And the manager? And the staff. What did you do? Bribe your way in here? No, I answered simply. Then how he pressed. I built it, he scoffed. Built what? This. I said, motioning around this place. This restaurant group. This experience you're enjoying right now. I built it. Quietly. Deliberately. While you were busy telling people I poured coffee for a living, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Lucas's jaw clenched. Mom's napkin dropped to her lap. She didn't pick it up. Dad exhaled slowly, like he'd just lost a hand at poker. The truth didn't land like a bomb. It landed like an avalanche. Slow at first. But growing irreversible, I picked up my fork and began eating again. The risotto was perfect. Across the table. My mother finally said, Olivia, we didn't know, I know. I said, why didn't you tell us? Because you never asked. The table fell silent again. Not the same kind of silence as before. This one was heavier, weighted with missed chances and ignored phone calls. Lucas reached for his water glass, then thought better of it. You always had to prove something, didn't you? He muttered. Oh, I said. I just stopped needing your approval. The server returned to clear the plates and pour the next wine. She moved carefully around the table, placing fresh glasses down and pausing when she reached me. Chef Theo asked if you'd prefer the kitchen tour before dessert or after. After, please, I said. Very good, Mrs. Grant. Lucas was staring at me now like he was seeing a ghost. The kind that wasn't supposed to come back. The kind that came back owning the house. The next course hadn't even arrived, and yet I could feel it already. Dinner would never be the same again. The candlelight flickered against the silverware and crystal, but I wasn't seeing the restaurant anymore. Not really. The table blurred, fading into the edges of a memory I had carried with me for decades. I was 11 the first time my artwork got displayed in the state showcase. A watercolor of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. I remember standing next to it in the gallery wearing a scratchy dress I hated, beaming like I had just been knighted. A local reporter asked to take my picture. She said I had talent and something called raw perspective. I waited all evening for my father to say something. Just one sentence. But instead he pointed out that Lucas had scored in the top 5% on his math placement exam. That's the future Olivia, he said, patting Lucas on the back. Numbers don't lie. It was always like that. Lucas with his business clubs, his stock-picking games, his endless parade of trophies that had less to do with passion and more with pleasing our father. He knew the currency of the house. He learned to trade it early. Me, I had color palettes and sketchbooks and long afternoons spent sprawled across my bedroom floor with charcoal on my fingers. No one asked what I was drawing. They asked when I'd grow out of it. One year I entered a design competition for a regional scholarship. The rules were strict and I spent weeks on my concept. It was a sculpture made from recycled materials tied to environmental awareness. I worked on it in the garage night after night, perfecting every detail. The day before the final submission, I came home from school and found it smashed. Just broken. No one claimed to know what had happened. My mother shook her head sympathetically. My father told me to be more careful with delicate things. Lucas sat on the stairs and watched me clean up the pieces. "You shouldn't have left it out," he said casually. I looked at him, then, something inside me cracking just enough to let the truth in. He was 16, already slick in his delivery, already used to getting what he wanted without leaving fingerprints. I rebuilt the sculpture the best I could, turned it in, and didn't win. The judges said it felt rushed, unfinished. I didn't even argue. I just stopped entering. By the time I was 17, I had learned to draw in secret. I kept my sketchbooks under my bed, scribbled late at night with a flashlight tucked under the blankets like I was committing a crime. In a way, I was. Creating beauty in a house that only valued control. At 21, I got accepted to the Parsons School of Design. It wasn't part of the plan. At least not my father's. He laughed when I told him, "Design isn't a career, Olivia. It's a hobby. Be serious." When I pushed back, he pulled funding. No tuition, no support. He offered me a compromise. Join the finance program at Columbia. Do something real. I declined. I found grants, took 2 jobs, and enrolled anyway. Every time I sat on the subway at midnight after a shift clutching a portfolio tube to my chest, I reminded myself that I chose this path. Not because it was easy, because it was mine. I graduated with honors. My father didn't come to the ceremony. The final rupture happened 2 years later. Lucas had just been promoted at Dad's firm, some made-up title that gave him power over people who'd worked there twice as long. We were at a family dinner, some overpriced steakhouse uptown, and I had just mentioned an exhibit I was curating at a local gallery. Small but meaningful. Lucas laughed. Must be nice not to worry about real deadlines. Or revenue, or success. I stared at him, then at my father, who didn't even flinch. Who sipped his scotch like Lucas had just quoted Shakespeare. "You're wasting your potential," Dad said. Just loud enough for the table to hear. "Art is for people who can afford to be useless." That was the last thing he ever said to me as his daughter. I packed up my life in 2 days and moved across the river to Hoboken. Tiny apartment, paper-thin walls, rent that made me wince, but it was mine. The windows faced west, and the sunsets looked like watercolor. I didn't cry when I unpacked. I didn't rage. I just made a promise to myself. I would build something they couldn't ignore. Not out of spite, not even out of vengeance. Out of the need to exist on my own terms. I started with pop-up galleries. Partnered with chefs, sommeliers, musicians. Spaces where food met art, where community and creativity could live in the same room. It caught on. People showed up. They posted. They paid. Eventually, investors came. Quietly. Not suits with briefcases, but restaurateurs who saw the vision. They didn't care about my last name. Only the results. I took my first ownership stake at 28. I didn't tell my family. They never asked. By 32, I had launched my third concept. A hybrid space in Soho that rotated chefs and artists every month. Critics loved it. Bloggers obsessed. I still lived in Hoboken. Still used coupons. Still wore the same beat-up boots I'd had since college. Some part of me thought the modesty protected me. Lucas just blinked. "Wait," he muttered. "Miss Grant?" I didn't answer. I picked up my fork, sliced a scallop, and tasted it. Creamy bright with just enough bite. I nodded thoughtfully and looked at the manager. "Tell Chef Ramirez it's close," I said, "but he needs to torch the citrus a second longer. The acid's fighting the rice." "Of course," the manager replied, bowing slightly. "Thank you, chef owner." Lucas dropped his phone on the table with a dull thud. "Chef what?" I turned my head slowly. He was already reaching for his phone again, typing fast, like maybe this version of reality could still be undone if he found the right Google result. I watched his screen from across the table. Ever and L Restaurant Group. CEO Olivia Grant. He blinked at it, then blinked again. Mom leaned in. What's ever and L. Lucas kept scrolling. It says, Flagship Maison Louvelle. Subsidiaries in Chicago, New York, Austin. A location opening soon in Napa. Wine country. Dad's voice cracked. I took another bite of the scallop, chewed thoughtfully. Lucas scrolled again. Wait. This is yours? I looked at him deadpan. You didn't think all I did was wipe counters at a cafe in Hoboken, did you? He opened his mouth. Closed it. His ears flushed red. I mean, we assumed Mom said quickly, her voice brittle. You never shared much. We thought you were just being independent. I leaned back in my chair, letting the leather hug my shoulders. I was. And building an empire while I did it. The manager returned with another bottle of wine, this one clearly not on the printed list either. A sommelier followed behind, giving a slight bow. Chef owner, he said smoothly. Would you like us to decant the reserve, Syrah? Yes, I said. And ask the kitchen to hold the next course for 3 minutes. Certainly. Lucas watched them walk away like they were actors in a play he didn't audition for, then turned back to me, voice sharper now. So all those years, all the struggles, was that a lie? No. I sipped my water. I just didn't think you'd care. You always made it clear I was the side story. Dad cleared his throat. You said nothing when we were planning this dinner. You let us pick this restaurant I bought it 6 months ago, I said. Thought I'd let you discover it on your own. Mom looked stunned. But you still live in that small apartment. I like it, I said simply. Big windows, quiet mornings. And the top floor is mine, technically. I own the building. Lucas was silent now, his jaw twitching. I looked at him. You Googled me, right? He nodded slowly. Then you know I own 27 restaurants. Michelin-starred chefs. The Napa location opens next quarter. You've been hiding this? No, I said. I've just been living it. Another server walked past and gave me a quick, respectful nod. Chef owner, she murmured. Lucas shook his head, muttering under his breath. I don't get it, he said finally. Why keep it quiet? Why not show off like everyone else in this damn family? I looked at the wine glass. The deep red swirl caught the light. Because power isn't loud, I said, and success doesn't need to scream. Dad was silent. For once, truly quiet. Like the realization was finally sinking into the same space where disappointment used to live. The manager returned. Would you like Chef to prepare the off-menu finale dessert? Yes, I said. He'll know which one. He nodded and vanished again. Lucas shifted in his seat. So you're the reason we were seated so quickly. The reason the staff keeps glancing at you. You're catching on. He leaned forward, elbows on the white linen tablecloth. And when the waitress greeted you as owner, that wasn't just some fluke. No, I said. That was just her being polite. The pause at the table stretched again. But this time, I wasn't the outsider sitting in their silence. They were sitting in mine. And for once, they didn't know what to do with it. The next dish hadn't even been served yet, but the tension was thick enough to cut with the steak knives they'd just laid down. It was the silence that came before the unraveling. And I didn't mind waiting. Lucas's fork scraped his plate, a sharp noise in the heavy quiet. Then he stood abruptly, muttering something about taking a call. His chair creaked back, and he walked off toward the bar area, already dialing. I didn't follow him with my eyes. I just watched the candles flicker on the table, listened to the hushed clinking of plates around the room. My family tried to act normal, but the air was different now, heavy with a realization they hadn't prepared for. I leaned back, letting the moment stretch, letting my mind drift to the version of myself they'd never cared to know. Not the woman in front of them tonight in tailored black and heels they couldn't name. But the girl 4 years ago sitting on a borrowed couch in Brooklyn with nothing but a cracked phone and a bank account flashing zero. It was Lucas who introduced me to Andrew. He'd been charming in a clean-cut Ivy League kind of way. A tech guy with a polished pitch and a confident smile. Lucas called him an up-and-comer and said we'd get along. Said he could help me launch the farm-to-table project I was developing, something small and sustainable. At the time, I had saved $38,000. Every cent I had. Years of late-night catering gigs, weekend shifts, teaching cooking classes in community centers. I'd been planning to buy a tiny space in Jersey City. A trial run for something bigger. Andrew smiled at my deck, told me it was visionary. He talked big about investors' seed rounds, rapid expansion. He offered to help file the LLC paperwork. I let him. 1 week later, he vanished. So did my savings. Lucas said he was shocked too. Said he'd trusted Andrew. But the way he said it, I never fully believed him. I spent the next 4 months sleeping on my friend Zoe's couch. She was a pastry chef who understood what it felt like to be gutted and still show up for prep at 5 in the morning. She gave me her spare key and split her tip money with me some nights. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't. Instead, I learned. I studied contracts. I built a new business plan. I scraped together loans from people who believed in the food more than the flash. I stayed quiet, and I built. And slowly I rose. Now, sitting across from the same people who once said I lacked vision, who called my cooking a hobby, I realized the pain wasn't sharp anymore. It had worn into something else, not bitterness, not pride either, just clarity. Lucas returned, his face tight. He didn't sit immediately. He just hovered behind his chair, thumbs still pressed against his phone like he might need to dial again. "Everything okay?" Mom asked, forcing a polite smile. "Fine," he said, but he didn't meet her eyes. Then he turned to me. "So this whole company of yours, how'd you fund it? You had nothing after." He stopped, realizing too late. He was about to admit knowing more than he should. I raised an eyebrow. "After what?" He said nothing. I smiled faintly. "You mean after your friend emptied my account?" Dad cleared his throat. "Olivia, that's not fair. You can't hold Lucas responsible for the actions of someone else." "I don't," I said, keeping my voice even. "I hold him responsible for not checking the people he vouches for." Lucas finally sat down. His knuckles were white around the stem of his wine glass. "Look, it's not like I meant for that to happen," he muttered. "But it did," I said. "And I survived. Which is more than you expected." He didn't deny it. He just stared at the tablecloth like it might shift and give him an escape route. The manager returned with the next course, duck confit with spiced cherry glaze. It was stunning as expected. I gave him a nod, and he smiled before leaving again. Lucas barely touched his food. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. To grovel, to beg. "I want nothing," I said. "This dinner was never about you," he scoffed. "You sure made it about you." "No," I said quietly. "I made it about truth. You just didn't like how it tasted." Dad looked like he wanted to interject again, but Mom placed a hand on his arm. For once she understood. I lifted my glass again slowly. Not to toast, just to taste. I remember the envelope arriving in the dead of winter. No return address, no note. Just my name typed in the middle and taped to the door of my friend's apartment where I was crashing. I had spent the night before applying for 2 waitressing jobs and crying in the bathroom so I wouldn't wake anyone. Inside that envelope was a check for $10,000. I stared at it for so long, I thought maybe it would disappear. But it was real. At the bottom, scribbled in neat cursive, was the name of someone I hadn't thought about in years. Mrs. Caldwell. My high school art teacher. She was the first adult who ever told me I was talented. Who stayed after school with me so I could finish my portfolio. Who looked at my family during parent-teacher conferences and said firmly, "She's gifted. Don't ignore that." Apparently, she'd been quietly watching me through local news stories, heard through a friend what had happened, and decided to give me a chance to rebuild. With that money, I didn't buy clothes or move into a fancy place. I rented a rundown commercial kitchen in Queens from a retired baker who liked that I worked harder than I talked. I bought bulk ingredients. I slept on a cot in the storage room with a space heater. I cooked every night until 2 in the morning. Burned 100 things. Perfected 10. Eventually, I fed enough people who told their friends that they knew a girl who cooked like she had something to prove. Because I did. A waiter appeared beside me now, gently clearing plates. I leaned slightly and said, "Send over the Tokyo preview set. And bring the pairing menu too." Investors just arrived. His eyes lit up with a spark of recognition. He nodded and disappeared like mist. Lucas frowned. "What Tokyo, Dad?" Looked up his fork. Mid-air. "Tokyo investors." The only sound for a moment was the clink of porcelain and cutlery as the servers prepared the next round. I took my napkin, dabbed the corner of my lips, and turned to them calmly. "We're launching Ever and L Tokyo this spring. The tasting menu was finalized last week. The investors are upstairs. They wanted to stop by quietly before their flight to Kyoto." Mom blinked. "You have a restaurant in Japan?" I didn't answer directly. Just lifted my glass. "To this special dinner." They hesitated, then awkwardly raised theirs. Lucas stayed quiet, phone still face down beside him. His mouth was tight. His mind somewhere else. I could feel it, he was calculating again. I saw the confusion in my parents' expressions. They were grasping for some thread to hold on to. Something familiar. But nothing tonight felt familiar anymore. The staff returned with the first course of the Tokyo set, a miso-glazed sea bass on lotus root crisp. It wasn't even on the regular menu yet. The aroma alone shifted the entire mood of the room. The kind of dish that made people believe in transformation. As the plates were set, a new energy moved through the table. The elegance of it, the precision, the unspoken reverence from the staff. Everything was intentional, deliberate. I had built that, and I was no longer ashamed of it. Lucas leaned in, voice low. "You're doing all this just to show us up." I met his eyes. "No. I'm doing all this because I earned it. Whether you're here to witness it or not is optional." He looked like he wanted to say something else, but didn't. Mom glanced at Dad again, and for once he had no advice to give. No dismissive remark. Just the furrowed brow of someone realizing they might have underestimated the wrong child for 30 years. The second Tokyo course arrived, a delicate uni tart on microgreens. My executive chef in Osaka had designed it after our last call. I remembered the joy in his voice when he said, "This is the kind of dish that makes them pause, that makes them respect who we are." The servers placed the plates, bowed slightly, and stepped back. I didn't say a word, just sat with my family as they stared down at the art on their plates. And for once they were quiet. Not because they didn't have opinions, but because they had run out of ground to stand on. As the next wine was poured, I tilted my glass gently, to tasting what it's like to be underestimated. The stem of the glass caught the light just right, and this time when I drank, it wasn't to soothe or perform. It was to honor the girl who had once slept on a cot in Queens and told herself, "Keep going." One more dish. One more step. Because she had chosen to stand. And that choice had changed everything. The warm scent of caramelized figs drifted across the table as dessert was placed in front of us. My fork hovered for a moment, then I sliced gently into the honey custard. It cracked perfectly. Precision. Balance. The kind of dessert that takes patience to make. Lucas was checking his phone again, a little too often, his fingers twitching like he expected a bomb to go off. He wasn't entirely wrong. Months ago, I had opened a storage box tucked in the back of my closet. Inside it were spiral notebooks stained with coffee, the pages crinkled with age. One of them contained my original business plan for what would become Ever and L. The logo ideas, the supplier list, the first layout sketch of the restaurant space in Queens. And stapled to the back of that notebook was a copyright registration dated July 14, 2014. I remembered the day it was filed. Lucas had read that draft at our parents' house. I'd left it on the kitchen counter while I went to get groceries. When I came back, he had a weird grin and said, "Not bad." "You ever think about going bigger than Queens?" I thought it was curiosity. Admiration, maybe. Until 2 months later, I saw his name listed in a local startup competition, pitching an idea eerily similar to mine. Down to the name. His plan flopped, of course. He didn't understand the layers. The math was off. He made the cuisine too generic. The judges passed, but I never forgot, nor did I say a word. I just kept building. And earlier that afternoon, as I sipped coffee in my office above Maison Louvel, I emailed a scanned copy of that original copyrighted plan to Jonathan Westlake, Lucas's lead investor. Jonathan had never met me, only heard about me from Lucas's vague stories about a struggling sister with a flair for food. He didn't know that flair now stretched across 4 cities and 2 countries. But now he knew I held legal proof that Lucas's entire pitch 2 years ago had been built on stolen material. I sent the file. And I waited. Now, as Lucas's phone buzzed silently on the table, I watched his face shift. One glance. That was all it took. He paled, like the blood had drained straight into the marble floor. His eyes flicked to me, then back to the phone. He excused himself, muttering something about stepping out for a minute, and hurried toward the exit. No one at the table said anything. I spooned the last of the custard, letting it melt against my tongue. Sweet. Cool. Familiar. When Lucas didn't return after 5 minutes, I stood and walked to the restroom corridor. Quietly, I stopped at the edge of the private phone alcove just around the corner from the kitchen. His voice was low but frantic. I don't know how she got it. I swear I didn't think she even had that kind of access. You're not pulling the deal, are you, John? Listen to me. This is nothing. Just a misunderstanding. She's bitter. She's making things up. Pause. My name's on everything now. I can fix it. Let me talk to legal first. We can spin this. There's no way she'd actually sue. She doesn't have the resources. Another pause. Then, she's bluffing. I smiled quietly and stepped back. I'd already sent the second email too, to my attorney, just in case he was foolish enough to try to call that bluff. Back at the table, Mom and Dad were awkwardly sipping coffee. They didn't ask where Lucas had gone. The silence between them was brittle. I sat back down. The server returned with a delicate plate of petite four, but I declined. I didn't need anything more. The manager reappeared beside me. Chef Tokyo team just texted. They said the investors are thrilled with the tasting. They'd like to confirm the spring opening date. Tell them mid-May, I said. Same weekend as the Sakura Festival. He smiled and nodded. Dad looked at me sharply. You're really doing all this? I didn't look at him when I answered. No, I already did. Lucas returned 10 minutes later, eyes shadowed and jaw clenched. He slid into his seat and didn't say a word. His dessert sat untouched. I reached for my water glass and sipped slowly. First strike delivered, and I hadn't even had to raise my voice. The hush didn't lift, not even as the scent of warm brioche and roasted fig drifted across the table, subtle and rich. A server placed the cheese course in front of me, brillat savarin, with fig compote, a dish I designed years ago in a borrowed kitchen in Brooklyn. No one else touched theirs. Lucas fidgeted, elbows shifting, shoulders too tight in his tailored jacket. It wasn't discomfort. It was panic, the quiet kind when your story starts cracking and you realize you're not the one holding the pen. He leaned forward, hands clasped like he was in prayer. Why didn't you ever tell us? He said it softly, but I heard what was really beneath it, accusation dressed in concern. The wounded ego of someone used to being the center, confused now by the gravity shifting. I placed my fork down. I did. Let that land. Then quieter. But everyone was too busy admiring each other to listen. His mouth twitched. Not quite a grimace. Not quite regret. Dad looked away, swirling the last of his wine like the bottom of the glass had answers. Mom folded her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. You own all of it? She asked, voice paper thin. I nodded once. Maison Louvel, Ever and L, Napa, Tokyo, all of it. Lucas blinked. Wait, you paid for our dinners here for the past 2 years. Dad straightened like I'd slapped him. That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked, lifting my glass. You never saw a bill. Lucas leaned back, scanning the room. Probably calculating how many handshakes, how many birthdays, how many wine pairings he'd assumed were just luck or favor. But why I looked him straight in the eye? Because peace is quieter than applause. That made him scoff. And I let him throw noise at something he couldn't shake. You never said a word, Mom murmured. Not at Emily's wedding. Or Christmas. You just let us talk. I tilted my head gently. No, I let you talk over me. That made her blink. And for the first time, her silence didn't feel like judgment. It felt like realization. Lucas tried again. Louder. You could have said something. Would you have listened? He froze. People like Lucas don't hear you until someone else repeats your name in a tone they respect. You think you're better now? He muttered. Jaw clenched. No. I leaned in slightly. I've always been this. You just never looked close enough. A server arrived with a velvet-lined box. He placed it in front of my father and stepped back quietly. Dad opened it slowly, a Mont Blanc pen resting on parchment. To the man who taught me to stay composed even when unseen. He didn't say anything, just nodded. The kind of nod he reserved for men who'd earned his respect. Lucas saw it and panicked. This was all calculated, he said. You invited us here to embarrass us. I shook my head. I invited you to dinner. Then paused. You brought the rest with you. He turned to Mom. Can you believe this? But she didn't answer. She was looking at me. Really looking. Like someone trying to match a face with a memory and realizing they never had the right image to begin with. Dad finally broke the silence. So this was your point? I looked at him. No. This was my truth. And I stopped waiting for permission to say it. Lucas's chair scraped loudly as he stood. I have to take this, he mumbled, pulling his phone from his jacket. He disappeared toward the private lobby. I didn't follow him. I already knew the call he was taking. The one I made happen. That morning I'd sent a scanned copy of my original business plan, time-stamped, signed, copyrighted to his lead investor. The same pitch Lucas had copied years ago. The same one he said wasn't a big deal. But today it was. I reached for my spoon. The dessert had arrived, caramelized pear tart. Simple, clean, and just the right amount of sharpness. I took the first bite. Lucas was unraveling, and I was already thinking about what came next. The table had grown quiet again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was reflective. I could feel their eyes on me like I had suddenly become someone else, someone not so easily dismissed. But the truth was, I had always been this person. They just never bothered to look deeper. I glanced around the room. The low hum of conversation, clinking glasses, polished silverware. It was the kind of ambiance people paid for without realizing they were stepping into a legacy. My legacy. And still I never put my name on the sign out front. The restaurant manager stepped forward, asking softly if I'd like the check brought to the table or settled in the back. I nodded. Here is fine. As she stepped away, I caught my father watching me with a look that was unfamiliar. Not pride, not exactly. More like curiosity. For the first time in years, he wasn't lecturing or doubting. He was listening. I sipped the last of my wine and let the silence stretch a little longer before I spoke. You know, I never set out to impress anyone. Dad raised an eyebrow. Then why go through all this trouble? This trouble. I smiled gently. This isn't trouble. This is what I love. He leaned forward. You could have told us, Olivia. I did. He looked confused again, so I softened my voice. Just not in the language you were willing to hear. Mom frowned, her fingers nervously folding the edge of her napkin. Lucas stayed quiet, eyes still darting between his phone and his plate, probably hoping his business partner hadn't replied yet. Dad cleared his throat. You've built something real. I nodded, and not alone. What do you mean? I thought back to the first night I worked in a friend's diner kitchen in Queens. I had nothing but a borrowed apron and a recipe book with half the pages missing. Every cut, every burn on my hand, every 16-hour shift, it all stacked quietly into something solid. But it wasn't just me. There was the teacher who once sent me a check for $10,000 after hearing I'd lost everything. The landlord who let me cook in a basement kitchen for 3 months rent-free. The older chef who taught me knife skills without charging a dime. And the girls. So many girls. I run a scholarship now. Mom blinked. What? For women in culinary school. Girls like I was. Ones who get laughed at for dreaming too big or working too quiet. We've helped over 50 this year alone. Lucas looked up sharply. 50, yes. Full tuition, equipment, housing if needed. Dad looked down at his hands like he wasn't sure what to do with them anymore. You never wanted recognition. I met his gaze. No, I wanted results. He seemed to struggle with that. But you're successful now. You could speak at conferences, be on TV. I shook my head. That was never the goal. I wanted to build, not brag. That silenced him. The manager returned and placed a folded leather check presenter in front of me with reverence. I opened it. Everything already totaled zero balance. It was all comped, of course. But I still signed. Olivia Grant, owner. The weight of that signature didn't hit me anymore. It was routine. But the way my mother leaned forward slightly as if trying to see the name that struck me. You're not the same girl who left home at 23, she said softly. No, I'm not. Lucas pushed back his chair, but slowly, like he didn't want to make a scene. I half expected him to storm off, throw out one last insult, but instead he just looked at me. So what now? Now, we eat dessert. I picked up my fork and sliced into the perfect vanilla bean custard topped with a sugar lattice. I don't need anything else from you, Lucas. He stared at me, then looked away. I know. And for the first time, I believed he meant it. We all took a moment to eat. Even Dad picked up his spoon and finished his plate. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had settled into something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. The next course would be coffee. But it already felt like closure. Lucas excused himself from the table with a strained smile phone already in his hand, before he fully stood up. I didn't follow him with my eyes. I didn't need to. I already knew. The server refilled water glasses as background noise hummed in soft candlelight. My parents sat stiffly, their silence doing all the talking. I sipped the last of my wine and glanced toward the back hallway. I could almost hear Lucas pacing desperate, explaining bargaining. Maybe he thought he could smooth it over, patch the holes with some version of the truth. But that was the thing about lies, they never held under heat. He came back looking paler than he left. His tie was loosened, his phone still in hand, screen dark. I looked at him steady. Problem. He didn't answer right away, just dropped into his seat. That was Greg. The Eden Hill pitch fell through. He said, "It's a conflict of ethics. Bad optics. He can't have someone accused of intellectual theft on the board." Dad turned his head sharply. What the hell is he talking about? I didn't blink. My original business plan. The one Lucas took to Eden Hill 3 years ago. Word for word. Except it didn't work without me, did it? Lucas leaned forward, his voice low, cracking. You sent that email. You ruined everything. I sent the truth, I replied. What people choose to do with it is their call. Mom's fork clinked against her untouched plate. This is getting out of hand. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single white envelope, sliding it across the table toward my father. I've officially withdrawn all investment funds tied to the grant name, effective immediately. That includes the winery in Sonoma, the resort project in Aspen, and the charitable trust in Chicago. Dad's fingers didn't move. He stared at the envelope like it was ticking. That trust carries your name, he said quietly. It did, I nodded. But I'm redirecting the assets. We'll call it a restructuring. Lucas's voice cracked again, barely above a whisper. You're cutting us off, I'm letting go, I said. Mom's chair creaked as she stood abruptly. Her eyes filled, then spilled over. Why didn't you tell us? Why would you just sit on this power for years? I wasn't sitting on anything, I answered. I was building. She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language, and maybe to her I had. Dad's head dropped into his hand, the weight of years settling into his shoulders all at once. He didn't speak. That more than anything was new. The dessert tray arrived. Too sweet, too pretty. No one touched it. Lucas finally picked up his spoon and tapped it against the table, not eating, just fidgeting. The clink echoed. No one stopped him. I signed the check when the manager brought it, still calm, still quiet. Olivia Grant, owner. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat in the truth. And for the first time in decades, they sat in it with me. The hum of the restaurant continued, other tables laughing, servers moving, glasses clinking. Life outside our table hadn't noticed the shift. But we had. It was done. Not with rage or spectacle. Just clarity. And a closing course no one saw coming. I stood from the table, folding my napkins slowly, deliberately. The weight of their silence pressed against my back, but I didn't turn around. I reached for my coat, adjusted the collar, and glanced over my shoulder one last time. Thanks for dinner. If you want to see me again, call the manager 3 months in advance. I didn't wait for a response. My heels echoed against the marble as I walked away. No applause, no gasps. Just the scraping of a chair as someone shifted awkwardly, maybe trying to catch their breath. Outside, the air was cool. Not cold, not biting. Just enough to remind me I was no longer in that room, no longer the girl hoping for approval that would never come. I looked up at the Manhattan skyline, the familiar hum of the city tucking itself into the evening. I didn't feel victorious. Not exactly. There was no triumphant music swelling in the background, no dramatic spotlight. Just a deep exhale that started somewhere in my ribs and reached all the way to the sidewalk beneath me. I slid into the back of the black car waiting at the curb. The driver, Nathan, didn't say a word. He knew better. We'd made this exit before. Once inside, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair slightly looser than when I'd arrived. My lipstick mostly gone. The neckline of my dress sat just a bit askew. This dress, God, I hadn't worn it in years. It was the same one I'd worn to my first restaurant's opening night. I remembered how nervous I'd been, hiding in the kitchen, peeking through the pass window to see if anyone had shown up. They had. Not my family, but the people who mattered had. The dishwashers, the servers, the line cooks, they'd clapped when the first ticket came in. They believed in me before I had numbers or headlines. That meant something. Still does. I ran a hand along the fabric, a little faded now, but still whole. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Not a smirk. Not smug. Just peaceful. Nathan asked if I wanted to head straight to the apartment. I hesitated, then shook my head. Just drive. Nowhere in particular. I wanted the motion, the lull of the city rolling past, to quiet the last few sparks still burning in my chest. As we moved through Midtown, I thought of Lucas, of the look on his face when his business partner called him a liability, the way his hand trembled holding the phone. And then Mom. Her tears weren't for me. Not really. They were for the image of the family she thought she had. The control she'd believed was hers. And Dad, his silence wasn't surrender. It was self-preservation. He knew speaking would only confirm what he feared most, that the daughter he'd dismissed had become someone he couldn't reach anymore. I didn't hate them. That surprised me. I'd expected some kind of bitter aftertaste, but there was none. Just the realization that I no longer needed their validation to breathe. The car stopped at a red light on Fifth Avenue. I looked out the window and spotted a bakery. Closed, but I recognized it instantly. My first pop-up partner years ago. We'd shared a rental kitchen, burnt 100 muffins that first week, and laughed until dawn. That bakery had grown too. Just like me. Quietly. Steadily. Without screaming for attention. We pulled away from the light and I leaned back, letting my head rest against the seat. My phone buzzed in my purse. One message. From Morgan, my operations director. Tokyo team confirmed. Investors thrilled. We'll finalize by Monday. I typed back, thank you. Let's schedule debrief Tuesday. Take the weekend off. You've earned it. I hit send, then put the phone away. My hand drifted back to the window. Fingers tapping softly on the glass. Keeping rhythm with the city. This wasn't revenge. Not really. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone. Just to be seen clearly, fully on my own terms. Sometimes the best retribution is presence. Survival. growth. And then when the moment comes saying less than you could, the car pulled up in front of my building. The doorman nodded as he opened the door. "Evening, Ms. Grant. Welcome home." I smiled, stepped out, and walked into the lobby, heels clicking against polished stone. There were no shadows behind me, only lights ahead. I stepped into my office just after sunrise. The air still held the crispness of early morning, and the quiet hum of the city below felt oddly calming. The skyline of Seattle stretched wide beyond the glass wall behind my desk, soft light pouring over the silhouette of the Space Needle. There on the leather couch by the window lay a stack of this morning's reservation reports. I hadn't even taken my coat off yet, but I could already see the red underline "sold out." Again. Evernell's Seattle branch had officially broken its own record for the third consecutive week. I finally sat down, pulling my chair close to the desk as I reached for the report. My assistant Sarah had left a sticky note on top of the stack. "Congrats, boss. Also, Tokyo confirms VIP tasting next Friday." I smiled. Not wide, just enough to feel it in my chest. The kind of smile that doesn't show up in pictures but stays in your bones. Then I saw the new message notification on my phone. Lucas. Just his name made my hand hover for a second longer than I meant to. My thumb hesitated over the screen. I hadn't heard from him since that dinner. Not directly. I knew his business partner had pulled out of the restaurant tech platform they'd been pitching. Rumor had it Lucas was scrambling to patch the damage. The message was simple. "I'm sorry." No punctuation. Just 2 words. Clean. Unadorned. I stared at it longer than I thought I would. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. It was just still. After a minute, I typed back, "Forgiveness is easy. Earning back trust takes time." I hit send and turned off my phone. Outside my office, I could hear the sounds of prep in the test kitchen. Pans being set down, the rhythmic chop of knife against board. A faint sizzle followed by someone's laughter. My team had started the day long before I arrived. I walked to the shelf above my desk where a frame sat tucked behind 2 old recipe journals. I picked it up. It was a photo of the first Evernell kitchen, just a little converted walk-up in Queens. Tiny stove, scratched counters, that window that never quite shut during winter. But I could see 25-year-old me in the picture, hair tied up, flower on my shirt, smiling wide with a wooden spoon in hand like I had just won the lottery. In many ways I had. Not because of money, or even success, but because I had built something, on my own terms. The knock at the door pulled me back. Sarah poked her head in. "Board call at 10, but Tokyo just bumped their tasting to 2 o'clock your time. Do you want to push your lunch meeting?" "No," I said. "Keep it. Let them know I'll be dining in the garden room." She nodded and left. The door clicked softly shut. I took a breath. Not deep, not heavy, just enough. Then I sat back down, opened my laptop, and pulled up the scholarship committee's email thread. They'd finalized the new list of awardees this morning, 52 young women entering culinary schools across the country. Some were daughters of immigrants. Some were survivors of violence. Some had been told more than once they weren't enough. And now they'd get a shot. A real one. I added one line to the email draft. "Let's start planning a welcome dinner for the cohort." As I hit send, the morning sun spilled fully across my desk, catching the edge of the engraved plaque by my laptop. Olivia Grant, founder and CEO, Evernell Restaurant Group. A title. Sure, but not the most important thing in the room. The important thing was that it had taken me a long time to earn it. Not from the world, from myself. Back at the family dinner that night, I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made speeches. I hadn't begged to be understood. And yet that was the night everything shifted. Lucas saw me. My parents finally listened, and I walked out without needing their approval, because I had already built my own house, my own table, my own seat, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to pull it out for me. Now, as I looked out at the city, my phone buzzed again. Another text. This one from Dad. No words, just a photo. It was a snapshot of the Seattle Times front page. The headline read, "The Woman Behind America's Fastest-Growing Culinary Empire." Under it, a picture of me from the opening night of the Chicago branch. I had forgotten that photo was ever taken. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because some things take time, and some things don't need answers. Just truth. Never underestimate someone. They might just be the one holding the door you're trying to break through. If Olivia's story resonated with you, subscribe for more powerful revenge and redemption journeys. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest strength. Stay with us. More stories are coming,